This is David Norris, a young politician who wanted to run for office in the US election. That morning, he started his campaign in front of his supporters. One after another, his campaign succeeded in gathering more votes than his opponent, but when election day almost arrived, his case from the past about a fight in a bar was brought to the TV. People began to doubt and consider him not mature enough to run for Senate. To see the reputation he had worked so hard to build destroy because of dirty competition, David began to despair. A few days later, after the voting ended, a secret organization was seen gathering on the roof of a building to discuss David's problem. They seemed to already know that David would definitely lose. The head of the organization, Richardson, then ordered his member named Harry to repair David's reputation. He wanted David to be nominated again in the next election. The next morning at the office, when he found out that the vote count results were a landslide defeat, David felt weak. Before giving his speech in front of his supporters, David first practiced in the toilet. Though sad, he had to accept defeat. Amid the practice, he was surprised when a beautiful woman suddenly appeared. She was Alyssa, a professional dancer. David immediately fell in love at first sight after seeing her beauty. A talk with her suddenly brought back his enthusiasm. Suddenly, his assistant, Charlie, came in and told him to immediately come to convey his speech, so Alyssa hurriedly left. This short meeting made David curious about her. During his speech in front of all his supporters, David told the story of his struggle with his campaign team from the start of the campaign until the end of the election. Even though he lost, he didn't want to give up. He promised that he would improve himself and run again in the next election. Everyone cheered in support to hear that. A month passed. At dawn, when Harry was watching David in the city park, Richardson came over and told him to make David spill his coffee before getting on the bus that day at exactly 7:05, so he wouldn't catch the bus. Not long after that, right at 7:05, David was seen just leaving for work while carrying a cup of coffee, but Harry unfortunately had fallen asleep, and when he woke up, he saw David had gotten on the bus. Inside the bus, David was surprised to see Alyssa again. He didn't expect to see her there. He then sat next to her. Meanwhile, Harry was still trying to catch the bus. When Alyssa arrived at her destination before parting ways, David put up the courage to ask for her number. Alyssa was happy to give it. When David arrived at the office, he didn't realize that all the staff there were standing still like a statue, and when she entered the meeting room, David saw Richardson and his men scanning Charlie's head. He tried to escape, but the men continued to catch him. In the end, they caught David. When he woke up, he was confused as to why he was in the empty building of people in black suits. Richardson then introduced himself as a leader of an organization called the Adjustment Bureau, tasked to maintain the flow of human destiny according to the plan written by the chairman. The reason he was there was because David had deviated from the flow of his destiny. This morning, he should have been late for the bus and shouldn't meet Alyssa for the second time. After explaining at length because David already knew everything about his secret organization, Richardson asked him to keep his mouth shut, and if he revealed the existence of this organization, all of his memories would be erased. Before being sent back to his office so that David would not have a relationship with Alyssa again, Richardson took the note where David wrote Alyssa's telephone number and then burned it. David, on the other hand, couldn't do anything about it. The next day at the bar, when David was trying to remember Alyssa's number, Harry came over and invited him to chat later in the afternoon. He would tell them about what happened to him before. In the afternoon on a boat, Harry explained that his organization only had one mission, namely directing humans' lives according to destiny. He knew that David really wanted to meet Alyssa and be with her, but he said that it was all in vain because they were not meant for each other, and no matter how hard he tried, Richardson would definitely separate him. After all, there were 9 million people in the city, and David couldn't possibly find her again, so it was better to just give up. Upon hearing that, David was silent in contemplation. 3 years had passed, and even though he had been reminded, David still didn't want to give up on Alyssa. Almost every day at the same time, he always went to work on the same bus, until one day, he accidentally saw Alyssa walking. He hurried to catch up to her, and when they met, he immediately apologized to her. While walking together, David explained how he had struggled for the past 3 years to find her. At first, Alyssa was irritated because David never called her at all, even though she had given him her number, but when David explained at length that the number was lost, she finally believed it. Both then continued chatting in the cafe. On the other side, when Richardson found out that David and Alyssa had managed to meet, he panicked and then rushed to separate them. In an instant, just through the door, he immediately arrived at David's location. From a distance, he and his men checked the plan while arranging a plan to separate them. Inside, he was told that David and Alyssa would kiss. Richardson panicked that if they kissed, David would deviate further from his path of destiny. He then ordered his men to lure Charlie there. Not long afterward, according to plan, Charlie arrived there. Because David had his speech scheduled for that day, Charlie told him to leave immediately, and like it or not, David had to. Before parting ways, Alyssa asked to meet again after the speech later. Coincidentally, she had a dance practice scheduled across the river near the location of David's speech that day. At first, Richardson was relieved that his plan was successful, but then David kissed Alyssa on the cheek, and that shocked him. After parting ways, David started his speech in front of his supporters. When the event was over, David accidentally saw Richardson monitoring him from a distance. Realizing that Richardson was planning something, David rushed to Alyssa's place. Unfortunately, he was late. The location had been moved to another place, but for the sake of his love, David didn't want to give up and then tried to look for the place. While searching for information on the telephone, Richardson continued to thwart all his calls. Even though Richardson had tried to reprimand and forbid him from meeting her, David still insisted on meeting her. After getting the new location, David looked for a taxi, but Richardson kept thwarting his plan. Even when David finally got a taxi, Richardson was forced to make his taxi crash. David panicked. After calling the police to help the taxi, instead of giving up, David called another taxi, and when Richardson found out that David got a taxi, he panicked. Thankfully, David managed to find Elise. Richardson had failed his task. David had really strayed far from his destiny. Disappointed, Richardson finally left them. At the headquarters, while analyzing David's case, because this was a special case, the superior planned to replace Richardson with another officer who was good at matters of love. The new guy's name was Thompson. He was so good he could solve love problems without breaking a sweat. On the other hand, after Elise finished her practice, she and David went home together and stopped by the club. After they spent the night at the club while walking home together, feeling they were both meant for each other, that night, David decided to tell his feelings to Elise, and she felt the same. After that, they went to Elise's place. The next morning, when Elise just woke up, she was shocked as to why her ex suddenly called and asked to meet. David, who was staying overnight, accidentally overheard her conversation. So that he didn't misunderstand, Elise explained that she and her ex had broken up a long time ago, but strangely enough, after months he called her again. Elise then told David that in the past she had been engaged, but because she kept thinking about him, she canceled the engagement and chose to wait for him. To hear that, David promised that whatever happened, he would never leave her again. Elise was touched. That day, Elise had a dance performance scheduled, and David promised after returning from the TV interview, he would come to watch her. In the afternoon after the interview, David was escorted to the break room by the staff, but without realizing it, he was teleported to the warehouse where he had been caught before. Panicked, he tried to find a way out. Not long after, Thompson appeared and introduced himself. Because he was fed up with them, David asked for an explanation as to why he couldn't be with Elise. Thompson explained that David was destined to be a president. His parents and relatives, even the people, had high hopes for him, so he didn't David to crush all those hopes just for a woman. If he was with Elise, his destiny would be changed, and he would fail to become a president, but David remained stubborn. For him, fate was not the end. He would never give up and would continue to fight for Elise whatever happened. Thompson remained silent and finally let him leave. That night, David attended Elise's performance. In the middle of the performance, Thompson appeared and said that in the future, Elise would be a famous dancer. He warned that if David refused to cooperate with them, Elise's future could change. She would just be an ordinary dance instructor. It may sound bitter, but sometimes love can destroy dreams. Hearing that, David began to reflect. As a warning with his power, Thompson made Elise fall and sprain his ankle. Elise was hurriedly taken to the hospital. At the hospital, while David was waiting for the results of the doctor's examination, Thompson came to him again. Annoyed, David hit him. Thompson said that Elise only sprained her ankle this time, but if David continued to force his will, she could be injured worse than this. David was in a dilemma, and after contemplating for a long time, he finally entered the room and hugged Alice while saying that she would be a great dancer. Because he couldn't bear to say goodbye, David just fell silent and left the woman he loved so much. Seeing his attitude, Elise realized that David would disappear again like before. 8 months passed until one day, David was seen campaigning to run for election, which would be held next month. After his speech, Charlie showed the news in the newspaper about a successful dancer in New York City dancer named Elise and her imminent wedding. When he found out that she would soon get married, David's heart was broken. In the afternoon, David went to the bar to calm down. When he wanted to order a drink, the waiter gave him a letter entrusted to her by Harry. In the letter, Harry asked to meet. In the middle of heavy rain in an abandoned building, when they met, Harry said the truth, that Thompson had been lying all this time. Elise's future would not change even if the two of them were together. But Thompson lied for good, as he just wanted David to focus on planning his future and not be too busy with women. David was confused as to why Harry wanted to tell him that. Harry answered that he didn't agree that humans had to surrender to what was written in the plan. Different than death, which couldn't be changed, but life was something that still be fought for. He just wanted people to live according to their own choices. After knowing the truth, because he still hoped for the woman he loved, David asked Harry to help him to meet Elise. He threatened Harry to help him, and in the end, Harry was forced to reveal the secrets of his organization. He said that the weakness of his organization was rain because they couldn't track people in the rain. He also taught David how to teleport and the mechanism of the door handle to determine where to teleport. Harry then told David to memorize the route of the door to the church where Elise would be married tomorrow. On the other hand, Elise was seen trying to calm her mind by dancing. Elise would indeed get married tomorrow, but deep down she still hoped for David. The next morning, the wedding day arrived. Luckily, it happened to rain that morning. David rushed to get to the church. Meanwhile, knowing that David was heading to meet Elise, Thompson and his men tried to stop him. David managed to find Elise in the toilet. He continued to apologize for leaving her again. He begged her to cancel the marriage. In the middle of the chat, Thompson's subordinate came, but luckily, David managed to paralyze him. To see Elise scared, David tried to explain everything while taking her away from there. Under the Statue of Liberty, David was confused about where else to run. He then got an idea. Instead of continuing to run away, he intended to meet the author of the plan, the chairman of the Adjustment Bureau. Before leaving, David gave Elise either to let him go to headquarters alone, that they would never be able to meet again, or come along and fight together for their love. Though they didn't know yet whether this method would work, the most important thing was that they fought for our love. After hearing this crazy idea, Elise chose to go with him. The two together opened the door. At the headquarters, when David entered, Harry panicked. Considered having leaked the organization's secret by telling David how to teleport to the headquarters, he was told to go to meet the chairman. David and Elise got lost on the roof of the building and were surrounded by people from the organization. They both finally confessed their feelings and kissed. Strangely, everyone suddenly disappeared. Amid the confusion, Thompson appeared from behind, wanting to erase their memories. Luckily, Harry arrived on time. He brought the rewritten plan for David and Elise. Because Harry was carrying direct orders from the chairman, Thompson was forced to give it and leave. Harry then showed the new plan while explaining that the chairman was touched by the two's struggle and decided to rewrite their destiny. Harry said that David was given the freedom to decide his way of life. Upon hearing the news, David and Elise were happy. When they walked home while holding hands, David and Elise met the members of the organization. They didn't know that their story had inspired them all. They found out that destiny could be changed, though hard and took strong determination, but still doable.